change is required for more just systems of land governance. What is the role of relationships and allyship in advancing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the concept of consent? How do we ensure that Indigenous peoples are included as decision makers in accordance with Indigenous systems and principles of governance?
We don't need to return to sort of a pre-contact society. That's not an Indigenous objective. I think that's often imposed on us by the outside, including Canadian courts, right? Like the idea that Aboriginal practices are supposed to stay static over time and that they are affirmed at some point. I mean, that's not the relationship we have with land. Every relationship evolves, and our relationship with land has to be one that accepts our modern circumstances as Indigenous people.
I put all of my hope into building relationships on the ground that are accountable and led by Indigenous people, and by working hard to build broad bases of support for Indigenous self-determination and Indigenous demands.
There's a concept, a word in Anishinaabe when we call agoiduin. It's actually an agreement to work together. That agreement to work together is based on this premise that you're doing it for mutual well-being and not for individual interests and for the protection or the enhancement of private property as individual interests. Everybody thinks relationships are about them, and relationships are actually relational. We learn this as we participate in ceremonies. As Indigenous people, we walk into that space, and I think you need to think about that humble approach of not erasing who you are or what you have to bring, but also being in a respectful relationship where you say, here I am, how can I help, but not imposing an agenda either.
You know, when I think about what white allies can do is talk to other white people. And what I think what we need is for not necessarily for our communities to always have to engage in sort of 101, is that a lot of allies could actually do that, lift that burden for us. We're living it every day. We're engaged in this all the time. We're doing all of this work. Be in the street with us when we need to, ultimately. Because when you show up like that, it sends a message that no letter to your MP can actually do. And it's not that you shouldn't write letters, you should. Physically showing up is actually really important.
The capital of Canada is actually existing on unceded Algonquin lands. So a solution for me, at least, is that Canada should be paying a regular annual lease on those lands that are identified as still being Indigenous lands.
Where land has been sold and developed, well, pay rent. A tax on every economic transaction should go straight to the traditional caretakers, who should also guide all further development on that land according to their values.
I'd rather see the government just say, yes, we do not legally possess this land. Let's work out a lease arrangement for it. There should be an annual payment that allows First Nations to develop their societies, develop their governments, and develop the institutions they need to also help manage those lands.
I think every province has an opportunity to have significant conversations about what resource revenue sharing and Indigenous jurisdiction and Indigenous laws might look like, whether you're in a context of treaties, existing historic treaties, modern treaties, or if you're in areas where there's Aboriginal title. I think any type of Indigenous interest in territory, which exists everywhere in Canada, warrants those really important conversations about who benefits. If it means setting aside, protected areas, And then I think there's a really important role to play in terms of lobbying governments to engage in deeper processes of environmental evaluation that include Indigenous legal orders as part of how we evaluate impacts on environment.
I think the struggle Canada has with its own identity, with its own nationhood, is that it's the missing piece, which is it's never figured out the relationship with our communities, what that actually looks like, how to live in right relation with us, nation to nation. And yeah, that means we would be richer monetarily, like economically, than we are today, because we always should have been. What I ultimately think Canada is what it was before contact, which is a collective of nations, right? And so it's much closer to the European Union, or maybe it's modeled after like the Federation of Planets in Star Trek or something like that. I mean, I don't think those models are crazy, to be honest. Like getting somewhere like that, where we have a collective of governance.
One of the top things that people that love the land can do is think about how the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People can be given effect in a Canadian context, and having provinces not only commit notionally to the declaration, but thinking about how it's then implemented, how free, prior, and informed consent has to be the framework for reconciliation in Canada, like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has told us.
What I'd like to usually advise people, though, municipal leaders, any political leaders, is identify a project that you can work on with Indigenous peoples as partners. Start there. Build those relationships towards sharing a common objective and looking to develop something, some expression of the Indigenous presence, historic and contemporary, in your region. And by doing that, you will develop relationships, you will develop a deeper understanding of the history of the Indigenous peoples in your area, and ultimately the kind of friendships that can help facilitate the deeper conversations around land issues and conservation issues and so forth.
In 50 years, how important is it to have people that have traditional and cultural knowledge about the land? And so we have to really build up and support Indigenous education systems.
A lot of people don't realize the value in learning language. It softens and changes your worldview to be more indigenous, you know. So it's like when I was learning the trees, yeah, I see the forest as a library now. Like, man, there's so much to learn.
In our language, you know, love is one of the most common words that we use. It's in everything. Deh. That word deh is so common and throughout so many of our words. Because we have to love where we come from, this earth and everything in it.
Across the country, Indigenous people in every jurisdiction are working sometimes in invisible ways and sometimes in really spectacular ways when they end up on the front pages on blockades. But that work is being done on a daily basis in order to restore governance systems. That right to exercise governance over their lands is something that everybody can support on a daily basis across the country today.
Allies are great. What we actually need are accomplices.
This is an invitation for the future generations. This is an invitation, us extending our hand to say, like, this is a way forward that we feel that we need to take.